Nick Lee is set to replace Jimmy Kennedy as the assistant wrestling coach on Penn State's staff. Not that it needs to be said, but this is a great move, an excellent move by Cael Sanderson and company.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And not only was it a great hire, it was the right hire by Penn State. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Seyko. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. And help me welcome him back from NittanySportsNow.com. That is Joe Smeltzer on the other side, beat reporter for Penn State football, men's basketball, and most importantly in this case, wrestling. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Joe, this is a phenomenal hire. It was the one that made the most logical sense here. I know there could have been some other options, right? Zane Rutherford seemed like a realistic choice, but Penn State wasted no time. Cael Sanderson announcing on the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club podcast that this is the move, that Nick Lee is going to be that replacement for Jimmy Kennedy. Your thoughts?
Yeah, everything you said, Zach. Penn State wrestling, it's going to stay in the family, right? We all know that. You look at the staff, obviously. Cody Sanderson is literal family to the head coach. Casey Cunningham has been with Cael since the Iowa State days. And then Jimmy Kennedy was, I guess, somewhat of an outset hire, but he's David Taylor's brother-in-law, so he still had that connection with Penn State. But yeah, I think Aaron Brooks kind of gave a pretty good tip in a podcast interview, which we're going to talk about another aspect of that interview later. But he was talking with Justin Batch about candidates to replace Jimmy Kennedy, and he mentioned Zane Rutherford and Nick Lee. Zane Rutherford obviously is pretty busy right now, I would say, trying to win an Olympic gold medal. So I don't think that was really an option. And then that kind of leaves Nick Lee. And I got to believe Aaron Brooks probably knew or at least had a very good idea that Nick Lee was going to get the job and fill that vacancy left by Kennedy going to Oklahoma State. But yeah, obviously Penn State, there's no reason to really not hire anybody internally, given what this staff is made up of and given how successful this program has been. And I think the important aspect that Nick Lee gives to this coaching staff is youth, right? There's nobody on the Penn State coaching staff. There was nobody on the staff, rather, that was younger than 30 years old until now. Nick Lee's a young guy, only 26, and wrestling's a young man's sport. You know, if you're in your 30s, as far as wrestling years go in competition, that's thought of to be pretty old, and that's a big reason why David Taylor at 33 is now the head coach at Oklahoma State. That's why Cael Sanderson became a head college wrestling coach in his 20s and then went to Penn State at 30. And we kind of saw it at Oklahoma State with Taylor hiring Thomas Gilman, who's only 29 and just competed at the trials a few weeks ago. Lee's even younger than that. And I think the big question that this brings is what becomes of Lee's competitive career, because obviously he did not take his shoes off at the Bryce Jordan Center at the trials. And I had to think that he probably would not have been hired if his competition career was over. I don't think that Penn State or any major program really would hire somebody that's still balancing a full-time head coaching job and a competition career. But at the same time, it would kind of surprise me if Lee is indeed hanging him up, given how well he performed at the trials and given that the guy that beat him to go to the Olympics, Zane Rutherford, is probably going to be done after this Olympics, you'd think, based on his age and based on the fact that, you know, as he said on the record, he had planned to retire and not even wrestle at this Olympic trial. So I got to think that Zane Rutherford, this Olympics will be his last active competition, and then that opens up a door at 65 kg for Team USA going forward. But yeah, this is a logical hire. Nick Lee's a guy that was also teammates with maybe not a lot, but multiple Penn State wrestlers, right? He was teammates with Bo Bartlett, teammates with Carter Starocci. So he knows this guys. And I think a storyline to watch, Zach, is going to be there's kind of a debate among the wrestling world what is considered lightweight, which Jimmy Kennedy coached the lightweights. Nick Lee's going to be coaching the lightweights. Is 141, is that considered lightweight? Is 149? Cael said in the same segment in which he revealed that Nick Lee had been hired that or he strongly hinted at least that Penn State considers the first 5 classes lower weights. So just by that, it sounds like Lee's going to be working with 125 through 149. And I think the interesting aspect of that is 141. Is Nick Lee going to play a big part in Bo Bartlett finally getting over that hump and winning a Big Ten and national championship? These guys were obviously teammates as recently as 2 years ago. And not to discredit the work that Jimmy Kennedy did, I think he did a great job at Penn State. I think that's why David Taylor hired him. And obviously the biggest evidence of that is what Braden Davis was able to do as a true freshman. But yeah, it makes sense for a lot of reasons. I would think it spells the end of Lee's active competition career. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Penn State played, I think, a pretty conservative hand in hiring somebody that's in NLWC, knows the program. But when you're as dominant as you've been, there's no reason to really go out and hire somebody from the outside. And we knew it was going to be an inside hire. And I think from almost the beginning, Nick Lee was the favorite, and he's the guy that ended up getting the job.
I think the most important part of this is that familiarity, right? You can go outside of the program, make a splash hire, and then there's, I don't want to call it a disconnect, but there's that acclimation period where you're going to have somebody that doesn't know wholeheartedly how Cael Sanderson, how Penn State operates in the wrestling mat room. You don't have that issue. There is no delay. Nick Lee competed for them. He's in the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club for them, and now he's on the staff, and he's been working with select wrestlers. Aaron Brooks doesn't make that kind of comment saying, hey, I think Zane Rutherford and Nick Lee would be the best options available for the assistant coaching job if that wasn't the case. Is Nick Lee young? Yes, compared to some other wrestlers, but former active, right? And David Taylor's 33, Thomas Gilman, right? So I think Nick Lee, he wouldn't receive those kinds of comments from Aaron Brooks if he wasn't ready to do this right now. As far as his wrestling career goes, his competition career, so Pat Mineo said that it seems like he's going to finish. He's finished. He's going to focus on coaching fully. And then it sounds like he's going to balance a competitive career. We saw Vincenzo Joseph do that with the Sunkist Kids, coaching for Stanford, while at the same time, and now he just retired. So I think that's why it was difficult to see, because Penn State's the best of the best. So, Joe, if you were going to get an assistant coach, you probably would prefer them to be retired, any hypothetical candidate, because you are number one. But if you can juggle both, right? That's why it was Zane Rutherford and Nick Lee. They are at the top of their game, respectively, 1 and 2 at 65 kg, at 65 kilos. So I think either way. Now, if you're looking, I think availability is the best ability at times here. I think Nick Lee is fully available to be a coach, and that's not to speak on behalf of Zane Rutherford or the idea that eventually Jason Nolf would want to get into coaching, right, and be a part of the Penn State staff if everything works out here. But why I like this move the most, Joe, is because I don't get the sense that Nick Lee is looking for something else. That is not a slight at David Taylor. That's not a slight at Thomas Gilman or anything, right? That's a once in a lifetime opportunity to go coach that magnitude of a program at Oklahoma State. But I get the sense that Nick Lee, his home, his heart is Penn State through and through, rather than maybe an allegiance to just Cael Sanderson or because of the people around him. Like, his heart is in Happy Valley State College. So I see him as a lifer, and I think that's why Penn State makes this kind of move, because they don't want to have to keep refilling the assistant coaching spot.
Yeah, and that's one really unique thing about wrestling, Zach, is that in football, for example, once Penn State football players leave, I don't want to say they leave the Penn State family, right? Because guys still come back. They're still at games. And obviously, when Saquon Barkley does something good, Penn State fans are going to like that, because obviously Saquon Barkley played at Penn State. But In wrestling, I feel like definitely with some of these bigger programs, the when guys leave the program, if they're really good and they continue a freestyle career, it almost feels like an extension of their college career, right? I think a good example is what we both witnessed at the trials is when David Taylor wrestled Aaron Brooks for the chance to go to Paris. Is that they did the whole lead up to the match and played that Lion King remix and had that "We Are Penn State" graphic on the scoreboard, and it felt like a Penn State wrestling match, and that really kind of speaks to what wrestling RTC is. It's like kind of an extension of the college program. So even though these guys are nobody turns pro technically in wrestling, but even though these guys have moved on from wrestling in the college ranks, they're still very much a part of that college family. And we saw that too with Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel was trying to be a UFC champion, but still there he is working with Jason Nolf, working with Aaron Brooks. I would assume that he's going to be right there with Aaron Brooks and Paris helping him win a gold medal, which that's also an example of how guys in combat sports are able to balance things, because Bo's doing this UFC career, but also coaching. Right. And we've seen wrestlers, you mentioned Vincenzo Joseph. Mark Hall was another guy that was an assistant at the University of Pennsylvania while keeping a freestyle career. Yeah, I think something I've grown to really appreciate in college wrestling in my fairly brief time covering it is that, once guys wrestle their college match, it almost feels like their association with that program is just beginning. When David Taylor left for Oklahoma State, I think it really hit home because this is a guy that's been part of the program for almost 15 years. And that's something that you really don't get in any other sport. So, yeah, I think that really speaks to what Penn State means to Nick Lee and really a lot of those guys. And I also think it speaks to, if it is true that Lee plans to continue competing, the faith that Cael Sanderson has in him to be able to balance a full-time coaching job and a freestyle career. And also Nick Lee's commitment, because Cael said in his interview with Jeff Byers that at times Nick Lee has put his training on hold to coach and to help make other guys better. So it just really makes sense for a lot of reasons. And I think it's another example of really what NLWC is and really how important Penn State wrestling still is to people once they've wrestled their last college match.
We have an update on Aaron Brooks's drug testing issue. Is it finally settled? Well, his father says so. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Now, LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you find the professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even the ones that aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you are looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn understands that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not necessarily have the time to devote to hiring. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process quicker, easier, more intuitive. And 2.5 million, that is right, 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So become one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So there is an update as far as Aaron Brooks's testing, availability, everything that was related to the Adderall that was found during the World Championships. And it's all kind of coming to a front here. It seemed controversial. Joe, I'll say this. To me, it didn't matter. Okay, this was not PED related. It sounded like there was a real discrepancy with the news even being released. It came out so late in the competition cycle, and nobody really talked about it at first. The news had been released, and we'll refer to Pat Minio a lot on this show when you and I chat, because he is so well connected again, I encourage people to go see what Pat has to say about the collegiate wrestling, international wrestling, right? But he talked about it, and nobody else really made any comments on it, just because it was like, whoa, this is shocking, this is surprising. And Aaron Brooks said it too, that if this was really going to be that much of a problem, he thought the news was going to be released much further in advance, before the Olympic trials and not after. His dad provided an update saying that he is clear. He's going to. And I never had any doubt in my mind, because it wasn't PED related, that this wasn't going to be an issue at the end of the day. And now that here's the debate, though, because some people are going to sit back and say, well, regardless, it was a failed drug test, or it was a drug related issue. Therefore, Aaron Brooks wouldn't have had the trials run that he had, or defeated David Taylor. So, Joe, does that matter to you? Do you think that if this news comes out before the trials, that Aaron Brooks doesn't have this kind of run, or if there had been proper discipline, quote unquote? I don't think it changes anything. I still think he wrestles the way he does at the trials, and he defeats David Taylor in that best of three, 2-0.
No, I don't think it changes anything ever, really. I think, if anything, it might have made Aaron Brooks stronger, because I use this analogy with what's going on with Scotty Scheffler at the PGA. It's when I think when stuff from the outside happens, the perception is that that stuff is going to affect somebody's performance on the mat, field, course, what have you. But I think in a lot of cases, it has the opposite effect, to where if there's a big distraction going on, in Scheffler's case, you go out to the course. In Brooks's case, you go out to the mat. Being able to do that is thought of as a relief, and you're so distracted by so many other things that the pressures that would come with a big time performance don't really seem to matter as much, and you're just kind of happy to be out there. But yeah, I don't think this was really in danger of becoming an issue. I think from what Brooks said, the real danger was him not being cleared to compete at the trials, which almost happened. He said he didn't get that waiver or what have you that he needed until Thursday, and the trials started Friday. So it sounds like that was really a real possibility. But everything after that, I don't think David Taylor takes the job at Oklahoma State if there was a real chance that he was going to be the alternate and then end up wrestling at the Olympics. I don't think Aaron Brooks does a lengthy interview with Justin Bash if his eligibility for the Olympics was in real jeopardy.
Yes.
I think the interesting part is kind of thinking about how this news got out, because if you listen to Brooks's interview, he said that he let on that there was a guy that he competed against that might have leaked that information to reporters. I don't want to
A rat?
Yeah.
What?
I don't want to put any words in Aaron Brooks's mouth, but it was implied at least that somebody he was competing against might have had a hand in this getting out to the public. Who knows? It probably wasn't a guy like Carter Mirsola, who is still in high school. Who was he referring to? Was he referring to David Taylor? Was he referring to Zahid Valencia? Who knows? We might never know that information for sure. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to think of how that news got out. But really, it's all in the past. It's not going to be an issue for Paris. I don't think it was really in danger of becoming an issue. The only real danger was Brooks's eligibility to compete in state college at the trials. And I think once he got that cleared, I don't think based on everything out there, I don't think there was ever a real serious chance that Brooks wasn't going to go to Paris. So it's all behind. Brooks sounded kind of amused about the whole thing, if nothing else, when he was talking about it. But yeah, the U.S. is going to have their number one guy at 86 kilograms, and we'll see what happens. I think he has a real shot to at least medal, if not go all the way. So.
Yeah, and all six of them do, right? I think the United States is truly sending its six best wrestlers at each respective weight class. For Brooks's the whole dilemma and everything around it. Like I said, if this was as serious as it was, it would have been reported timely, right? I think that the timeliness of it all was a little questionable, and the way that he explained it, this was Adderall for class, okay? And if it was rumored that, hey, this had to do with performance enhancing drugs and he was taking steroids, and it's like, okay, we really need a thorough investigation here, and this, due diligence needs to go through this to make sure that Brooks can be cleared. But this wasn't wrestling related. The medicine was not wrestling related. So that's why at the end of the day, I saw it as inconsequential. I did not see it as a big deal. And if this was going to affect his competition availability, I thought it would have been a bunch of BS.
Yeah. And going back to that interview, it was actually Vyvanse, however you pronounce it, that Brooks tested positive for. This is per Aaron Brooks. It Vyvanse, Adderall, those are different. I don't know how different they are, but that is what he says he tested positive for. Just going back, to the Olympics in general, I think I agree that the U.S. is sending its best guys. To break it down real quick, obviously, Spencer Lee is having kind of I would call it a burgeoning freestyle career. We all know what he did in folk style. It's looking like, from what he did at the trials and what he did at the world qualifiers in Istanbul, his freestyle career could be just as good as his career at Iowa, which is scary to think about. And then Zane Weatherford, another guy that had a great folk style career. He might be the best story Team USA has because of what I alluded to earlier with him almost, in fact, planning on retiring and getting a job outside of wrestling. And then 74, you have Kyle Dake, doesn't have a gold medal yet, has done pretty much everything else in the world of folk style and freestyle, or freestyle and folk style, rather, with him being a 4-time national champ at Cornell and a multi-time world champ at the freestyle level. And then Aaron Brooks, 4-time champ. What can he do in freestyle? Kyle Snyder, former gold medalist, his career is pretty self-explanatory. And then Mason Parris, I think we've talked about this before, Zach. He's probably the biggest question mark because obviously with Gable Steveson being released from WWE and with him winning a gold medal, you have to wonder kind of, did Gable make the right choice by foregoing these trials? And if he did wrestle at these trials, would he be the guy going at 120? Who knows? But nonetheless, I think of the people that did compete in State College, Parris was the best one, and Parris is a Hodge Trophy winner. He's, I think, a multi-time national champ in Michigan, and he's a guy that's definitely formidable, and I think has a chance to make some real noise. So, I think there's a good mix of kind of underdog stories, which I would put Zane Rutherford in the category of, maybe even Aaron Brooks in the category of, a mix of folk style legends, and then a mix of guys that have won in freestyle too. So, I think Team USA has a chance to win some medals, and I think at least 1 or 2 gold medals. So,
now we'll finish with this. We've alluded to the podcast appearance that Aaron Brooks had made. He made some comments about David Taylor going to Oklahoma State. Carter Starocci has contributed to that conversation as well. They've been slightly controversial, to say the least, and we'll finish with that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. It's winner take all time right now in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $150 in bonus bets to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. The lines for the Eastern Conference Finals are out now. The Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. If you look at game one, which you can find right now on FanDuel, the Celtics are 10.5-point favorites in game one of the series. You can bet on that, who would win the series, who would win game one, and the lines could move depending on who everybody likes. But you'll have $150 in bonus bets to bet on all of that and more. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Aaron Brooks, Carter Starocci share their thoughts on David Taylor's move to Oklahoma State. It seems like not everyone was totally on board with Taylor leaving Happy Valley from State College to go to Stillwater, Oklahoma. And I don't know that I necessarily blame them because, I mean, that's your brother. at the end of the day. He's been in the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club for a long time. Aaron Brooks's comments, I think, were unique in the sense of he alluded to that this felt like a rushed move and that David Taylor didn't exactly think about it as much. And maybe there was an attack on his identity. And then Carter Starocci said that, alluded to the fact that David Taylor is basically chasing a big paycheck through all of this. Outside of and then it always circles back to, well, Penn State is awful. The fans are awful. They can never just be happy for someone, whether that was the Jordan Burroughs situation at the Bryce Jordan Center with one fan making nasty comments and just everything that all the fan base is basically preying on David Taylor's downfall. Joe, that's not at all true. None of that is true. All of these arguments that Penn State is just ungrateful, awful when it comes to supporting and just being supportive of any wrestler when they're actually in the mat room versus people that are competing at the United States Olympic trials. At the end of the day, I can understand why this isn't going to sit right with everybody. Again, this is what it has to do with, Joe. I don't want to, this isn't envy, this isn't jealousy, this isn't even fear. But it starts with this. David Taylor and Oklahoma State are the closest thing right now, the idea of this program, to being a threat to Penn State's dynasty. Not Iowa, right? Not any of these other programs, and there's only a select few. Michigan, right? I could go through and try, but they're just so far behind. Again, 100 points. We saw the team standings. So David Taylor and building something special at Oklahoma State, and the fact that you're going up against one of your Penn State brethren, like that's difficult. That really is difficult. And you're also, let's not forget this, Joe, you're competing against a lot of these guys head to head. So you're on the same team, but you're also competing against them. So that's your brother. You're going through all the trials and tribulations, and then you have to wrestle for one spot at the Olympics. So it's no wonder that there's just a little bit, I don't want to call it bad blood, but just not all the feelings are hunky dory in this case.
No, and you kind of have to consider the source in this case, because we talked about before with Carter Starocci. Any opening he sees to kind of be a self-promoter and be a showman, he'll take it. I think a good example was when he said he was going to end Jordan Burroughs' career. I think we could have probably assumed that he wasn't actually mad at Jordan Burroughs for saying that he would have attacked Carter's injured leg as a competitor. And then at the trials, Starocci confirmed that he wasn't mad at Jordan Burroughs for that. He was mad at him for all the stuff that went on with Mitchell Messenbrink, but that was a separate matter. I think this is probably a similar thing. I think part of it is Carter being Carter. Another part of it is him sensing the opportunity for a Penn State-Oklahoma State dual meet and wanting to get a jump start on hyping that up. Yep. So that's I don't know how much I'd read into that. I think from Aaron Brooks' end, it's a lot more interesting because I mentioned earlier Brooks saying that implying that he feels that the news of his testing issue could have been maybe leaked out by competitions. Here's a direct quote from Aaron Brooks. It's funny, this is from the Bassmania podcast. It's funny how things come out after you win something or someone loses. Someone's going to make an excuse. They're going to kind of cry about it. That's someone's character, right? If you're looking for excuses, you already lost. So I just think, yeah, it's interesting seeing, like, you have the wrong stuff, referring to Finance being what Brooks reported he tested for, and it had been reported Adderall elsewhere. But yeah, you kind of put that quote together with the comments you just mentioned about David Taylor. I don't know. I'm not saying that there is for sure 100% bad blood animosity between Brooks and Taylor. I'm not saying there was a falling out or anything of that nature. But you put those two together, and people are going to read those that follow wrestling closely, and kind of assume, or at the very least be curious as to what's up there. Was there stuff going on behind the scenes with Brooks and David Taylor? We don't know now. We might never know, but it does make you curious, right? It makes you very curious. And yeah, I think Carter's comments are going to be pretty easily brushed off. I think Brooks's comments are a lot more interesting
Hmm.
because there might be something there. There might be. I don't know for sure. And then whatever everything else I've seen about David Taylor moving to Oklahoma State has been pretty positive. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
good for this guy. Sad to see him go, but he's going to kill it
Oh
at
yeah.
Oklahoma State, and Penn State better watch out. I haven't seen really anything too crazy at all, but because Penn State is the evil empire in college wrestling, I think that's something, a label that Penn State would probably embrace at this point. People are going to kind of look for any reason to attack Penn State, and they're going to see one negative comment toward David Taylor and kind of assume that everybody at Penn State feels that way. But no, I think the main reaction to David Taylor leaving has been a pretty positive one, and they know that David Taylor's going to do a great job. And the big concern is if David Taylor does well at Oklahoma State, that's going to be some bad news for Penn State wrestling going forward. So, yeah, the
Mhm.
most interesting thing I think is what Aaron Brooks had to say. Is there animosity between him and David Taylor? Who knows? But I think a lot of people are maybe assuming that that's the case. So.
The dynamic is strange. At the end of the day, the dynamic is strange because there is only one Olympic spot. There's only one representative. Yes, they go in groups, right? There's going to be four wrestlers that end up going to Paris as alternatives, but they don't compete, right? It's the one and only spot. There's only one and only medalist if you can reach that, representing the United States. And unless there's something that fluke comes along, that's only how you get to become as the replacement. So when you're all in the same, yes, you're on the same team, you're in the same wrestling club. I can understand why there is this almost like everybody's at arm's length, and there's this uneasiness around of like, yes, we're all good friends, we're all brothers, but at the same time, you're my enemy to an extent because we're competing for the same thing and we can't both have it. You don't share a trophy at the end of the day, and nobody would really want to. So I can understand. And then from David Taylor's point of view, whether it's Aaron Brooks, whether it's Carter Starocci, or let's throw Bo Nickel into this as well, even though I know Bo Nickel's in the MMA route currently, right? But imagine if he was actively competing at the Olympic level. For David Taylor, why would he be the one to, coach up basically his replacement? His replacement. I'm basically getting into the fact of David Taylor is not going to be, he's worked a lot with Levi Haynes, right? And helped coach him and helped train him to be one of the greatest wrestlers currently in folk style. And I'm sure he'll have a good freestyle career as well eventually when he makes that turn. But to basically coach up your replacement and work, whether that would have been Bo Nickel, whether that Carter Starocci or Aaron Brooks, it's kind of weird, especially you're David Taylor when you're not ready to pass the baton just yet.
Yeah, and I gotta think that there were tips, that David Taylor shared with Carter Starocci, Aaron Brooks, Max Dean going back, but I have to think the dynamic was definitely a little different than it was with a guy like Levi Haynes, who not only him and DT had that connection because Levi was,
He was never a threat. Levi Haynes was never a
was
threat.
never threatened. He was also the first, I think the first guy that trained at M2 when David Taylor opened that up. But yeah, I asked David Taylor about this before the trials. Basically asked, how do you go about having a mentorship role in NLWC, but also knowing that if you teach these guys something, these guys meaning Carter or Aaron Brooks, they could
Yes.
use that against you and hurt your career down the road. And he kind of played off the answer saying like, guys are going to wrestle, guys are going to see different styles, guys are going to find out the things that I'm teaching them on their own. But yeah, I got to think that that dynamic it made things a little interesting, and it probably made David Taylor understandably careful with playing a mentorship role for these guys. Was that something that Aaron Brooks took personally? I don't know. Who knows? But yeah. I gotta think that the mentorship role probably was a little different for the guys competing at 86 kg than it was for the guys competing at a higher or lower weight class. So.
Joe, I'm all for a little tension here, especially, I want to see Penn State wrestling continue to be this dynasty like program, number one. But at the same time, how about a little resistance? How about a little more competition? The fact that the gap is 100 points when it comes to the team standings, and that you're expecting 5 or 6 NCAA champions, and you can almost all but guarantee at least 4 of them in a cycle for the Nittany Lions. David Taylor going to Oklahoma State is good and can at least threaten some balance here in college wrestling, and hopefully some other programs can catch up as well. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I encourage you to check out Joe's work over at NittanySportsNow.com. You can follow him on X as well. And Joe, thanks again for the time as always. I enjoy chatting wrestling with you each and every time.
You bet. Thanks, Zach.
Once again, thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you enjoyed this conversation around Penn State wrestling, leave a like on this episode. Share your thoughts down in the comments section below. Join the conversation. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest discussions around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.